Today, I wanted to review a book that I'm finding really useful for working with children and young people with restricted eating. There's lots of resources out there for kids who are fussy eaters, picky eaters. They're great models for those kind of interventions, and I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm talking about the restricted eating, where you're really reduced in the amount of food that a child or young person is having. And this book actually applies across the lifespan, but my experience as a child psychologist is working with kids, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs and activities that I found really useful from this book. So this is CBT for Avoidant and Restricted Food Intake Disorder. By Thomas and Eddie, and I was lucky enough to attend some training with them, and they had some really practical activities that I've really enjoyed using with kids, and I've extended a little bit, so I wanted to give you those today. I love it because, one, it comes with a patient handbook that you can show people visually a bit of a model of what's going on, and what they've found from their research, and that's the second thing that I love about it, is it's evidence-based, is that there's three maintaining factors for restricted eating, and they've got visuals to go along with that. And I usually show these to children and young people or families and say, which one or maybe all of them applies to you. So the first one can be the sensory-based issues and just the feel and texture. The second one is fears, so things like worries about vomiting or choking. And the third one is just the restriction in itself. So the fact you've stopped eating, your body starts to become starved, and the limited amount of food you're having makes it difficult to eat. And I find really quickly kids look at me as if somehow I've read their mind, and it's quite amazing and powerful that they can visually see this and they feel like somebody understands them, and they'll really quickly put themselves into one of those three categories, or sometimes all three. And the couple of activities that I love is, one of them is looking at that sensory-based maintaining factor. And it's this idea that some people are super tasters. And they've got some research to support this, where they've put people in brain scanners, and different parts of their brain light up based on the sensory experience. And the way that they do that for children and get them to identify it in a therapy or clinical setting is using some pH papers that are specifically designed to test bitterness. And I love this. I have done this with families, and it's really powerful. So the child understands something about themselves, but also the parents understand that sensory experience is really subjective. I bought my little sensory papers, and I'll provide a link below. I bought them from a website, I think it was called The Mad Scientist or something fun. And you get the person to rate the level of intensity of the bitterness out of 10. And it's this idea that some people are super tasters. And that's what they hypothesize, is that some of the people who have this eating issues, they're actually super tasters. And what they taste as being really high, some people wouldn't. And even when I was doing this experiment in the training, I became really anxious about it. And I was really concerned. I had these instructors who I felt like I trusted saying, some people are going to find really uncomfortable. Some people will feel like this is a very big sensory experience, and you may find it really uncomfortable. I was panicking. I was really quite scared, and it helped me connect and understand why it must be so hard for some children and young people. They're really concerned. And so some people will feel like it tastes like nothing, it tastes like a piece of paper, and some people will rate it as really high. And one person in the training group was kind of eyes popping out of her head. She was needing a drink of water. She was a super taster, and this was a big group of people. Some people were in the middle. I myself was actually a non-taster. I felt like I'd been given a piece of the book to actually chew on. It was really nothing. I think that's a bit of a superpower when you work with children and young people with eating issues, that I can just taste anything. Nothing bothers me. And so it's really powerful to do that with parents, where they might have a big experience and they go, and then their partner is saying, actually, it's a 0 to me, just eat it. And they're like, no way, I'm never tasting that again. So they suddenly get this empathy with their child's experiences, which I really think is cool. And the child learns that they might be a super taster, and this is why it's hard. But also they're doing something incredibly brave, an exposure activity of me saying, just taste this, rate it, use your scientist brain, your upstairs brain to describe it. What number is it? Is it bitter? So I think it's a really cool activity. The other really cool takeaway I got was an activity for treating that third part of the maintaining factors, and that's the restriction in itself. And this is this idea of teaching kids about empty and full. So we need to teach them. And what I love about working with most of the kids that I work with, if you give them a rigid rule, they stick to it. They love that. They're like, why hasn't somebody explained this to me earlier? And I give them the rigid rule that you start eating at 30% and you stop at 80%. And I teach them what 30 and 80% feels like. And a lot of parents go, oh, they're not going to understand percentages, but they really do, because they all have iPads. So I say, when do you put your iPad on to charge? You don't wait till it gets to 2%. You put it on a little bit early, and you don't have to wait till it gets to 100%. You wait at 80%. And I get the kids to put maybe a visual on their fridge of empty and full, and every time they're going to eat, I get them to ask or explain where they are, and if they're not 30%, they need to wait, or if they're at too low, that's really helpful for them to learn. So the idea of a visual is one way, but also the activity that these authors showed us was just drinking water and getting people to experience full. So starting off by saying, actually, yeah, I think I'm about 20% empty, or I've just had morning tea, so I'm actually already 80%, and drinking and going right up to 80%, and maybe even trying to push yourself past that to 100%, feeling that discomfort. So you've actually taught them interoception, they've tuned into their body, but also that discomfort passes. And then he's just going to go on, do another fun activity, and then check back in. Oh, what percentage are you now? What percentage are you now? So they're getting to learn that interoception of tuning in and learning that discomfort will pass, and there's things that they can do to help them while that discomfort passes. I've expanded on that a little bit in therapy with kids. I've made stress balls with balloons and filled it with flour, looked at when it's 30% versus 80%, talked about how that's like your stomach. This is what your stomach feels like. And if it, just like the balloon, the first time you stretch it up, it's really hard. And if you haven't been eating a lot, that's what your tummy is going to be like. But it gets easier to fill and blow up. The other things I've done is using water balloons, filling up that with water, and they love that. It turns it into a really fun activity. So those are a couple of the fun activities and a bit of a review about this book, particularly the use of the visuals in it. And I hope you enjoy it. I really look forward to having your feedback on how you've implemented some of the activities from it, or if you've found the book worthwhile. Thanks a lot.